Hello, I'm Catherine Brown Ramsperger, author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls, but you can call me Kathy. Welcome to my story hour. I created Story Hour to connect avid readers with brilliant writers. If you're one or both, you've come to the right place. Today, we're going to be chatting with poet, author, essayist, reviewer, teacher, and playwright, Ellen Birkett Morris. Before we begin, I'd really like to remind you that even though this chat is appearing here as a premiere and not live, we are both here awaiting your questions. So comment and question away. So Ellen's a native of Louisville, Kentucky. She's the author of a short story collection, Lost Girls, which I adore, and Surrender, a poetry chapbook, but she has appeared in so many literary journals, so find her work. She holds a Master of Fine Arts in Fiction from Queen's University in Charlotte. Her short stories have appeared in Antioch Review, Shenandoah, South Carolina Review, Upstreet, and so many more. She's been finalist for many awards, including the two most recent Reynolds Prize Fiction Award in 2020 and the Rita Dove Poetry Prize in 2019. Her accolades and publications are too numerous to mention here, so check out her full CV at Ellen Birkett Morris, that's 2 L's, 2 T's, 2 R's, .inc, that's I-N-K. Welcome, Ellen.
Hello, pleased to be here.
Thanks for being here. So I'd like to read a review that appeared in Southern Review of Books in July, right after Lost Girls launched, and I'll start with that. The female characters in Lost Girls both startle and uplift us, but most importantly, they demand to be seen. Set in and around the fictional southern mining town of Slocum, each of the 17 stories in this collection features complex women and girls in pivotal moments of loss, self-discovery, and rebellion. With the same ease found in her Bevel Summers Award-winning short story, May Apples, Morris weaves in difficult topics effortlessly. In this collection, she does the important work of showing women as complicated, resourceful, erotic, unlikable, I love that part, and bold in the face of societal pressures and outright violence against them. As Morris told the Southern Review of Books, these stories were initially intended for a collection built around a male photographer, and you'll notice that too as you read the stories, traveling around the South for the bicentennial. Then the Me Too movement happened, Morris says. Women were bravely telling stories and getting taken seriously. I realized my fiction reflected the rape, sexism, ageism, and pressure to conform that was being discussed in the larger culture. I wanted these fictional voices heard. While these stories do feature experiences of repression and loss, they do not focus so much on the traumas as the resilience of the women surviving them. A quiet defiance pulses throughout the work. Whether it's a girl embracing her tummy sticking out, I loved that one, Ellen, because it's a sentence in my own book. A married woman discovering her queerness, or a young woman taking charge of her life by ending it. These are women who refuse to conform to the expectations placed on them by regional values, institutions, and even themselves. Through vivid snapshots of female struggle, Morris demonstrates the power of women acknowledging one another and themselves in a world where they are continually diminished. The women and girls in these stories hold the antidote to their own erasure, and in turn give it to us. Only we can prevent each other from becoming lost girls. Bravo. And Pulitzer Prize finalist Lee Martin says, the stories in Ellen Birkett Morris's collection Lost Girls are memorable for the way they see the lasting truths that reside within the familiar. These stories are full of imaginative leaps that capture the wildness that lies beneath our seemingly ordinary lives. Morris is a writer of extraordinary talent. With elegance and precision, she can turn a story into something luminous and unforgettable. So I am so honored to have you here, Ellen. And most of the questions are going to be about Lost Girls.
Okay.
But I would love, because you have such a poetic voice, for you to share a poem with us, because we have enough time for a poem.
I'll be glad to do that. And the poem I'm going to share with you is called Abide. And it was in an anthology called Running with Water by V Press LC. And it actually ended up being aired on a public radio program called Away with Words. So some folks got to hear it, which is a great and wonderful thing. So here's Abide. It's unfashionable these days to spend your time watching wood light radiate off wood floors. Notice the rich grain, linger over your old dog's fur, marvel at the softness that still remains. Relish simple flavors, the peach, the ripe tomato. Get lost in sentences of Dickens, wander as they do through narrow alleyways, or wind through the fields of wildflowers that is Austen's prose. Bathe in the sound of your husband's voice as he tells a long story of neighbors. Allow the minute, the second. Savor the tick, indulge the talk. Pause what passes for your life to feel the slow stretch of time made slower for the pausing. Wait until you feel your place. Each breath a moment held, each breath given for the next.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very much about life and about story both. So thank you for that. I know everybody's going to appreciate that sharing. So now let's launch right into the stories in Lost Girls.
Sure.
So I wonder if you would say that most of your stories are about loss, or most of the stories you write in general are about loss, or did you choose stories for this collection with that theme in mind?
You know, I didn't really have that as a theme in my head as I did this. I do think the theme that I probably had is something you mentioned earlier, which is that idea of resilience. Because I think losses are something we all experience in different arenas and in different ways. But it is that question of resilience and what we do with the loss and how we move past our own pain to connect with other people that really fascinates me as a writer. But I've been told, I mean, I know that those stories are sort of rife with that, but really it was those moments of triumph that were in my head. It was those moments of connection and those moments of sort of moving beyond those things that were so hard. That was sort of the engine. So the title is Lost Girls, but in fact, you know, these girls, though they may be lost, seem to find a way either within themselves or by connecting with other people to get out of those situations or to make something beautiful out of something tragic.
Mm. They don't just lie down and say life is over. There's not a single victim in any of the stories. And I loved that. Very brave and strong in their choices. So this is just my thing, but could you tell me, and all of us, why you chose the name of the town Slocum?
Oh, okay. You know, I'm not really entirely sure where that came from. I think I like the fact that it had the word slow in it, and I think that small town life often has a pace that's somewhat different, you know, and so I kind of just pulled that out of the air with the idea that I wanted that root word in there because these people were living in a different way than their urban neighbors were.
Those are the best ideas, aren't they? When they just come out of the air like that.
Yeah.
They're
But, yeah.
inspired things. I thought it was perfect, and I thought it was wonderful that all the stories surrounded the town. I mean, they were in the town, and I loved the photographer too, who comes and goes.
Right.
Okay. In my review, I say Lost Girls is full of real women who are trapped in some way by longing, by lust, by family allegiance, by society, by grief, to deny some big part of themselves. Do you feel most girls who grow up to be women, of course, are trapped or lost in how or how not?
I feel like, I'll tell you what I really feel like. I feel like inevitably in our roles as women and girls that we get silenced or ignored in ways. And so, consigned to certain roles of not feeling free to express a range of emotion, expected to behave in certain ways. And those were the things I was bumping up against there. Those ideas, that women way more than men have sort of these pre-prescribed ideas, like the woman in Harvest who becomes invisible when she gets older, and she is still a vital, interesting woman, and yet she's unseen. But across the board, there are ways in which, women, I think, were somewhat silenced. And that was the thing that sort of drove me as I was exploring these ideas.
So, most interviews have touched on lost girls, religion, and inheritance, which I also love, but I'll ask a question about two I haven't seen you discuss.
Okay.
The first, like I miss not being a ballerina, seems to say what makes us misfits is actually what connects us, helps us empathize and help others. Do you agree with that interpretation? If so, can you dig a little deeper?
Yeah, I actually love that interpretation. That's not something that I've really thought about consciously until you posed the question. And yet, I find that in most major points of connection that I have with women in my life, it is those things that make us different. It's those quirky things, or those somewhat odd things, or those sort of the things we tend to hide from people, that help us build those strongest bonds. And so, yeah, I think that's really true. And in this case, we've got this interesting sort of parallel situation. This young motherless girl who feels lonely, who feels awkward physically, with these two brothers who just kid her all the time. She's got this great loyal best friend who looks out for her, who tries to help her feel beautiful, who defends her when they play dodgeball. But then, her friend's mother is in danger of losing her life. And so there's a sort of a parallel situation going on there between those two. But the thing that draws them together are the ways in which they're unique. And as you said, the ways in which they're not the perfect pretty girls. One of them contemplates how she loves her tummy, even though nobody else seems to love it. So
What
she,
do we do without our tummies? I mean,
hey, yeah, they're here. So that was really, to build that bond between those girls, and then to have that, you'll notice that there'll be in some of these stories, these parallel lines, these sort of parallel situations where the one girl is going to be able to use her empathy and life experience to help the other girl, no matter how that turns out with her mother. Because she knows what it's like to have experienced that loss, and then also to have been embraced by the other girl's mother, who's depicted as very, very kind. And so, yeah.
I love that, because there's so many women that stand up for each other or hold each other's hand, um, and my mother lived quite some time, but she got Parkinson's when I was 12, and I don't know what I would have done without my two high school friends. So I love that one, and I was definitely that girl. That was me. So emoticon. It's about supreme disconnection. It chilled me even more than Inheritance. Everybody read Inheritance too. It also seemed the most current story. we see this everywhere. I feel like every college student or even high school student should read it. Touch is an obvious way to overcome it, but how do our voice, our words help to overcome the emoticon life we're all living right now?
Yeah, it's interesting that you ask this, and I'm thinking about, especially right now with COVID, how disconnected we all are. And yet, as you mentioned, our voice and our words as a way to connection is really, really important, and so the couple in that story really had allowed these sort of using these devices as a substitute for this normal human engagement. The real back and forth that comes when people are able to look at each other and talk to each other. And so I see us now even through things like Zoom. Here we are, we're geographically distant, and yet we're having this conversation where I feel very connected to, and to what you're saying, and I feel like we're having a great sort of back and forth. And so I think that's, it's really, the onus is on us to do that sort of work to break down those barriers. And I will say that I've managed to find a good deal of solace in, like, I launched this book. I haven't been in a bookstore. I haven't stood next to my friends, but I've found a good deal of solace in the words and the voices that have come to me through personal letters, people saying they've read the book and been touched by it, comments that people will make on Facebook. I really feel like I've been able to establish some bonds that are even deeper than what were there before. Through technology, which is pretty ironic when you think about it, but that we're using every way we can to work around and to feel that sort of closeness to each other, even if it means that we have to do it through a computer screen or by typing comments in a thing. I long for the days, though, when I'm able to, put my arms
There's
around
me
my
a
friends.
hug, right?
Yeah,
My
exactly.
family members hugs, but my daughter is in college right now, and she came to visit, and we wore masks and we couldn't touch each other. It's just sad,
Yeah.
and she's fine, but because she needs to have that kind of social life. She's young, but it's a crazy time, and maybe emoticon will lessen a little afterwards when we realize that we're more than our phones.
Exactly.
So I really loved the connections between seemingly unconnected or even disconnected people in these stories, like in religion and inheritance. And you seem to have written these stories in isolation of one another and then brought them together into almost a family of stories. It's just uncanny. I'm really impressed with that part. How do you make those connections, or does it just come naturally?
Well, I would say in reference to these stories, I have an admission to make, which is that I initially wrote these as a linked set of short stories, sort of a la Winesburg, Ohio, or Olive Kittredge, where these were set in Slocum, Kentucky. Yeah, and I had an outsider. I had the male photographer, which you mentioned comes into some of the stories. And so he was sort of the through line. And so I had him interacting with various people in who show up in the book now. And I sent that out. And what I found is that people didn't like him as much as I liked him, or publishers weren't as captivated by that as they eventually turned out to be with these female stories. And so when the Me Too happened, when Me Too movement came to the fore, I really contemplated, how silenced people had been, and I asked myself, I've been writing for a very long time. Do I have stories about women and girls? And I sat down and looked at my files, and there they were. Now, some of them had this male photographer in there, and so in some of the stories, I just moved him out or I toned him down. And I found that the women in the stories were the most interesting part of the story. So
I agree that they're captivating. And so it's also an interesting concept of a perspective in terms of the internal workings of the photographed, or the like the woman in the art, the piece of art, right? Don't you sit there sometimes and look at a piece of art and wonder what they were thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the story Kodachrome, we get a look at the girl, the picture of the girl at the very end of the story, but we get the backstory behind the picture through the whole story about how she was able to get herself photographed. And there's this question of, will she find what she wants to find in her image? And I'll leave that hanging. I'm not gonna give anything away there. But also that idea of connection and disconnection. In one of the last stories, swimming, I create a story around two people who really have been in each other's orbit, but not face to face until they're older in this story. But the truth is, they'd seen each other. They lived in the same town. It's an older librarian who after a very tragic sort of romantic situation, got a house on the edge of town, and the young man who wandered through the woods and happened to see her bathing through the window. And she knows that he's doing this. She's aware of this. She discovers this at some point. And so they've been in each other's orbit. And so I lay out their life stories parallel, side by side snippets of their life experience, ending with the two of them coming together in a hardware store, and a gift that's given to her by him that's symbolic of the kind of relationship that they had. And I'm really captivated by that idea about people who are in our orbit, and the ways in which we're connected, even though we may not know that we're connected, the sort of parallel things that happen in all of our lives just by virtue of being human. So
I found in life that people I'm connected to come around again too.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about that story. It was perfect closure. It wasn't a pat ending either. It was, wonder what's going to happen next kind of ending. But it was still so amazing that they'd held each other in their hearts sort of all those years. Maybe hearts is not the right word, but it was a memory that they kept.
Right.
Yeah. So finally, how did Lost Girls become a play? It's my favorite story in the collection, probably many people's, because it starts at like a boom and you're just in. I can't imagine how you transformed it.
Well, I'll have to say, I wrote it initially as a monologue, as a dramatic monologue. So it is, in fact, now this as a story, it's been expanded, but the words are much the same. The words are much the same. And so I published that in a small online journal from North Carolina. And then I entered it into the Actors Theater Heidemann Award for 10-minute plays, and it was a finalist. And then it received a staged reading at the Arnoff Center in Cincinnati through the Cincinnati Playwrights Initiative, a fantastic group. So I got to have a friend of mine from college direct the play. And it was really a fantastic moment to be able to collaborate with him, to watch an actress do a beautiful sort of portrayal of it. There's just, there's very little that's like watching your words come to life on stage, except for maybe holding your book in your hands for the first time. So that's how that was done. That was it was a short dramatic monologue. And then I thought, well, this is really a first person story. So I took it from there. Yeah.
Well, now I can see how it worked in both genres. So I know that we've got as many readers as we do writers here that watch these. And so it's important for me to let them get to know you as a writer a little better. How long have you been writing, and how long have you been publishing?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've been writing all my life. I wrote as a child. I wrote for my school newspaper. But then, I got jobs that were sort of out of that realm. I spent a little time working for a company that indexed newspaper articles for a research database. I spent 10 years as adjunct faculty teaching public speaking and interpersonal communication. And then I veered into journalism. So I worked for our local women's magazine, for our major newspaper, freelance, for the business newspaper, freelance. I went on staff with the business newspaper, which was a bit soul killing, I'll be honest, to write about buildings.
Gotta pay the bills, right?
Yeah, that's right. You totally have to do that.
I
And
did it too.
yeah. And then there was a point at which, I was probably 35. I am now 55. And I said to myself, if I don't do this, I'm never going to do this. So I gave myself permission to be bad at writing. I was afraid of failing. And I said, well,
That.
I'm going to do it. You got to do the bad stuff before you can do the good stuff. So at age 35, I really began to seriously embark on a career as a creative writer. I started with poetry. I took lots of workshops. I would take week-long workshops like the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop. I took classes. I started to publish in small journals, and then I would get bigger things like being a finalist for the Rita Dove Award, things that built my confidence, that helped me develop my voice. And from there, I began to get interested in short stories. I worked on these short stories while I was going through the MFA program at Queens. Um, and along the way wrote short plays and wrote personal essays, creative nonfiction, and actually have in my possession one finished novel and one pretty solid first draft of a novel. So it was very much like me to work incrementally, as I gained my confidence and honed my skills to kind of work my way into larger projects. The novel that is finished that I'm currently sending around, I was writing it in earnest 5 years ago when I turned 50. My mother was ill with lung cancer, and I had just been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And so it was a time of great pain and struggle for me. And I would sit down every day, and that was my escape, was to immerse myself in this.
Can I ask if it helped or it detracted? It sounds like it was healing.
It was healing. It really, really helped. I have to say, the story itself is a story of struggle. It's a mother whose child has past life memories of war, and in alternate chapters with the soldier whose memories the child has. So we see her struggle unfold as she tries to figure out what's happening with her son, and we see him shipped off to Vietnam and put in the thick of battle. So I have to say, it was I describe it as like chipping away at a mountain with some nail scissors.
Mm-hmm. Right.
but it was a great escape. It was, for me, a great place to put it. I could set aside for a few hours the tremendously challenging things I was dealing with and do that. And so we'll see what happens with that.
This novel was I had written novels, but the kind that you put in your bottom drawer.
Yeah.
And I knew this one really had to see the light of day, but it was written in 5 years of trauma. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Lots of death, and I had melanoma. So, and I lived. So,
yeah.
Spoiler alert. But it's a wonderful healing modality. So we share a couple of favorite authors. Hemingway and Kingsolver seem as different as night and day, but they're two of my favorites.
Yeah.
Can you tell all of us why you enjoy them? I enjoy them for different reasons.
Yeah.
They certainly aren't alike, but I love them both.
Yeah, I have to say with Hemingway, I think it's his clarity, it's his economy of language, it's how much meaning he packs into so few words, which just as a journalist who worked in short form and as a poet really appeals to me. I'm not somebody who's going to write elaborate descriptions of setting. I'm just unless I'm forced to do so. So I love what he does there with that. And also, I have to say, there is an authority to his language. To the straightforwardness of his telling lends him authority, and I think that's important as a writer to have that in your work, in the way you present your work. Barbara Kingsolver, on the other hand, part of my attachment is, I'm from Kentucky, and she's from Kentucky, and so it was she and Bobby Ann Mason were some of the first Kentucky female voices where I read them and I thought, I could do that. They can do it. I can do it. Look at them. Look what they're doing. And then the other thing she does that's just so amazing is, God, she takes on the problems of the world and she incorporates them in her books, but she does it with such subtlety and always through the lens of character. So she addresses huge issues, but she does it in a way that's very palatable and very readable and very natural. And I love that she has that. These larger things are being discussed. So again, they're powerful works in the world because they talk about how things could be different.
Yeah, I agree, totally. So there's just something that I'd love to know, and not having an MFA, kind of getting a BFA before BFAs existed. It was creative writing, lots of creative writing seminars and famous people teaching me to write, but it was a bachelor's. And it's sort of been my regret. And I'd love to hear what your MFA did for you.
Okay. Well, it did a lot of different things. I think one of the things our program director at Queens, Fred Lebron, emphasized was reading as a writer. So, everything is a learning experience if you're reading as a writer. It also really connected me with some fantastic peers, Kelly Fordon, Dean Monty, Linda Downing Miller, Mark Lynn Ferguson, Mesha Marin came out of that program, and she was there when I was there. So there were some fantastic other writers, and we were weighing in on each other's work, which really was very, very useful for me. And then the other thing I got is that I got some guided feedback, some very specific feedback from a couple of my mentors that seemed to be the right words at the right time. So one of my mentors said, "You are a prose stylist." And I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but once I sort of got my head around that concept, I found that to be very high praise.
Praise.
That gave me a boost of confidence. And then I had another teacher who would read my characters and she'd say, I believe it in these people.
Right.
Wow. So that was enough to really keep me on focus and fueled, as I went forward. So that, and, of course, lectures and lessons and readings that were fantastic. So.
Well, it's still on my bucket list. I haven't given up yet. So do you prefer one genre or another, or you just, something comes to you in a form and you go with it?
I think that things come to me in a form and I kind of go with it. So the novel, Beware the Tallgrass, that I described to you, I wrote it as a short story. I took it to the Antioch Writers Workshop. Erin Flanagan, the wonderful workshop leader there, she talked to me about how to sort of raise the stakes on the story that was being told about the kid who was having the memories. So I took her advice, and when I took her advice, I realized this could be a novel. This could actually be a novel. And so it was just a very circuitous sort of way into figuring out what that was going to be. But it's happened to me time and again that I'll have a piece that I'll think might be one thing that turns out to be another thing, if I'm just willing to give it time and sort of follow what, the signals in terms of what the form should be. So.
Great. I find it's the same for me. Do your characters come to you first?
Sometimes ideas, concepts will come to me first. So
Mm.
in the story Religion, the concept I was dealing with was that social groups are like religious cults. That sometimes social groups have very strong opinions about how you ought to behave and what you ought to do.
Especially today.
Yeah, yeah. So I started with that, and I thought, well, so I thought about the La Leche League, and I thought, well, let's put this poor, lonely woman, have her wander into a group like that and see what happens. And she's lonely enough that when she goes there and they're lovely to her, she decides to stay.
Mm-hmm.
So I did it as my graduate reading. I read the story Religion. And when I got to the line in the story that said, when I returned to the group, everybody burst out laughing. It was like, oh my God, she went back. She went back. So that story initially turned out to be about an idea. But the truth is, as the character evolved for me, as the situation evolved for me, it turned into something else. It was really a story about loneliness. Um, so it's sort of being open to what presents itself as you work with those ideas is really a good way, because you can get new things from that. You can get more from that if you're open to sort of follow where it leads instead of trying to force it into a certain mold. The people in that room with her, and rather than being judgy, they were just warm and lovely, and so she just wanted to stay.
Right. Well, who wouldn't?
Yeah.
The loneliness is part of a pandemic right now, and it was before this year. So I thought it was poignant. So do you have a favorite character or one that has just stayed with you that you'd like to write about more?
I think that would probably be Terry, who is the waitress at the diner who carries the poetry book in her pocket.
Mm.
And she's the one with the mother who is really not very kind or supportive. A mother who has problems of her own and sort of judges her harshly, misjudges her.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a sexual assault happen at the same time as she was having a burgeoning romance with a guy she really liked. And because of her trauma, she wasn't able to get past that and continue to form that relationship with him. So I know there are untold stories there. In fact, I've got a short story that deals with her and the boy that she had formed the attraction with. That wasn't part of the collection that I'm sending around to get published elsewhere. But she would probably be it. She's complicated, and I think she's got so much potential, and yet
She is complicated.
yeah.
So finally, do you, well, no, one more thing.
Sure.
Do you revise a lot? I'd love to know that.
I do a fair amount of that. I think with short stories, probably less so than with the lengthier works.
Right.
I feel like I know my way around short stories.
The arc and all that. It has work. It's like a puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But with short stories, I feel like I know sort of what the pieces are, what needs to be there. But then, I've really found that it benefits me to, and this was advice that Lee Martin has given people in workshops, to let things cool off and go back to it, because then you can see whether or not you're really pulling off what you think you're pulling off. And so, what I'll find is that I'll read a short story again, and I'll find that I can turn up the tension in one area or another, or that I may have kind of left something out that's an important piece, and then always this sense of, am I stopping in the right place? Am I landing on the right ending? One that's satisfying and yet not too neat.
Right.
Yeah.
It shows. Revision. I think I revise a lot more than I write words. And finally, do you have any advice for writers kind of mid-career, not just starting out necessarily, who want to publish in short form? It's getting I always say it's the best of times, it's the worst of times for that kind of thing, because it's becoming highly competitive, more so than it's ever been. And yet you have all of these venues searching for writers. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, and it can be very discouraging to go through that process. I've had as many rejections as anybody, and I submit as if I'm a freelance journalist. I submit vociferously. Um, uh,
Journalism makes you like that,
it,
doesn't it?
yeah, it makes you hungry for that byline. Yeah.
The byline, and also the rejection just doesn't bother you that much.
Right, exactly. So I think that my advice would really be, and this is, I do author interviews for a site called AuthorLink, and lots of good writers have told me this, which is to put your focus on the process of writing itself. Put your focus on the work that you do in the room, as opposed to what's going to happen publication-wise or not. And if you put enough of your focus on the work that you're doing, you may end up with a product that's something that people are going to want. And I guess I would give this advice, because this is really what I started to think about with writing short stories. It's not enough just to tell a story. You want to tell an extremely unique story. And so I am looking for quirky characters with quirky desires. So I'm looking for something out of the ordinary. And then once I find that, I am populating their world with all kinds of authentic detail that is very specific to them and what they want and who they are. And the writer Ron Carlson talks about the ways in which populating your world with detail can propel your plot and story, can deepen your sense of who the character is, and actually lead you in directions in terms of plot and story. So you're paying attention to what you've put on the page. So in the story Fear of Heights, the character there says that love is a spiky and beautiful thing. And at the end of the story, her ex-husband gives her a tiny carved wooden rose, which is in fact a beautiful and spiky thing, just like what she had described earlier. So quirky desires, authentic detail, let it propel the plot, and then look for callbacks. Look at your work and ask yourself, what can you call back in the story that will deepen the meaning of it, or give that sense of satisfaction that you've reached the ending that you wanted to reach. So that would be my kind of advice for, again, just immerse yourself in what's happening in the room, nurture yourself as a writer. Let the publication stuff be secondary to your own journey of your own talents and your own voice and your self-discovery, what you learn about yourself as you're putting things on the page, and then let the rest of it fend for itself. So
great advice in a nutshell from a prolific and widely published author. Thank you, Ellen. So I would ask what's next for you, but you've told us about the novel and a story, but maybe you have lots of stories circulating all at once.
Well, I have the novel I mentioned, and then I've got a second novel that's really a solid first draft that I want to get to work on. I've also been revising an essay that talks about my influences as a writer, and it really gets to this. It talks a lot about being read to as a child, and what are those early things that you hear that hit your ear. So my father would recite the Jabberwocky, but he would also read aloud Flannery O'Connor short stories. So I had all kinds of voices in my ear there. And as far as that, we'd listen to the Beatles, Revolver, and hear about Eleanor Rigby, and the priest wiping the dirt from his hands as he walks from the grave. Now, if that won't set you up to write some melancholy short stories, I don't know what will. So yeah, so I'm working on the early novel draft. I'm working on essays and things, and I think there are a lot more short stories in me. Lately, I've done just flash fiction and some poetry, and but I think once the dust settles here, I will get back to short stories as well, and because they are, I think, of all the forms, the one that I have the most fun with in many ways.
Well, and the dust will settle. Just enjoy it, because it's quite the ride after you publish a book. And I don't think I enjoyed my first one enough. I plan to enjoy the second one a little more.
Yeah.
The aftermath, I mean.
Yeah.
And everybody, you can find Ellen and her work at Ellen Birkett with ellenbirkettmorris.inc. And I'll leave it in the comments. And is there any place else you'd like to send them, Ellen, besides your website, that they could?
The website has samples of my work. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. You can find those links on the website. And I've done a fairly good job of linking, offering links to readings like this, to reviews and interviews that have been done with me, if you want to explore more of that. So
it's a very full website, and just your CV alone is worth taking a look at. So please do visit it. As I said before, please do leave your questions and comments, and Ellen will be there to answer them, or is there to answer them right now as you're listening. And Ellen, I always pull a tea bag saying for every guest, and they're always right. And your stories are full of compassion and resilience. And this is the one I pulled today. Nobody can read this, but I always show it to show that I'm not making this up, because I do have a vivid imagination. The principal ingredient of life is love. And I think that is what your stories show.
thank you. I love that.
I do too. Thank you. So, any final remarks?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the work. And I want to wish everybody out there, happy reading and good writing, and trust yourself and grow your talent, and enjoy every minute of it.
Thanks for being here today. You've just been an inspiration. Thank you. And I just want to say that next week we'll be interviewing Angelina Kalahari, who's a musician and author of Under Namibian Skies. We're going to talk all about love and the globe, and connection around the globe. So thank you again, Ellen. It's been such a joy. This is Kathy Ramsperger from shoresofourSouls.com, bidding you a good weekend full of weather that the U.S. has not been experiencing lately, and a great book to read no matter what. Thanks a lot for joining us. Bye for now.
Thank you.